Fiona, and I'm a community manager for Raw Fury, which is an indie game publisher based in Stockholm. Who wants to go next? Whoever speaks first, go.
So my name is Anders Lauritzen. I am the developer of Skald Against the Black Priory, a retro-style RPG that is currently in development, and I am publishing the game with Raw Fury, currently based in Stockholm.
I'm Mark Lemmert, co-founder and lead developer of Nox Archaeist, which was released in December of 2020. Nox Archaeist is a Ultima-inspired RPG which runs on physical Apple II hardware and runs on modern computers via a click-and-go app or via Steam and Good Old Games, and is sold as a download or as a collector's edition box set. It's also the most recent game. It's also the most recent game in which Lord British appears and was endorsed by many 1980s developers, including Steve Wozniak, Richard Garriott, and John Romero.
Nice. Okay, so my name is Damjan Mazetic. I'm an author of Call of Sagnar, which is a fantasy medieval adventure RPG, very much inspired by Betrayed Grandeur. It's an RPG from 1993. It was quite a hit back then, but today few know them, but it's okay. Yeah, in a nutshell, this game is about story, characters, first-person exploration, turn-based combat, and the presentation fits somewhere in between the 90s and 2000s. Low poly 3D, photorealistic textures, and actual flesh and blood characters that I have green screened in. Yeah, so that's it.
Great. So my name's Stefan Kadakini. I'm the founder of a small indie studio in Canada called 81 Monkeys, and we're working on an Ultima-inspired role-playing game called World of Antera. I think what maybe is a bit unique about this project is we have a team of 12 working on it, and it's actually equally inspired by modern RPGs as well. But to Skald's point, it's a Western-style role-playing game, so it's an open-world role-playing game done in pixel art. And one of the things that we're really focused on doing is really pushing some more modern or mainstream technical visual effects and combining that with our pixel art. So, yeah, I don't have a box to show, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But you're working.
Very jealous. I'm very jealous of that.
We've been chatting, and that's awesome what you're working on there. It's going to be exciting.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, sorry. So I cut you off. Now you get to go, Adam.
Sure, I can take the next. My name's Adam Burr. I make games under my Ultima Dragon name of Golden Flame Dragon. I founded Tapestry of Ages Games. I'm working on a primarily Ultima 5 inspired RPG. My initial sketches for it were back in '98 when it was a prequel to Ultima 1, but a decade later I filed off the Ultima-ness and started working on The Dark Unknown. A couple years ago, I decided to future-proof that name and renamed it Chronicles of Eleusis 1, The Dark Unknown, because if I do any sequels, then The Dark Unknown's the bad guy of this game, so the name won't make any sense, and this way Google searches can actually find it. And my North Star of the game is basically Ultima 5 with some modern sensibilities and improvements. And I don't have a box yet, but I do have the art for it for when I do make it.
Well, I guess I'm last. Well, I'm Adam.
Not least.
What?
But not least.
Oh, thank you.
Certainly
also
not.
Adam. And also, I'm the developer of Realms of Antiquity, which is a CRPG that runs on actual retro hardware, which is my TI-99 4A home computer. Ah, yes, you have your sealed copy, I see. Nice.
We got a group shot here.
It's about to come down.
It's now a convention.
Yeah.
Can you sign this, Adam?
You have some trouble doing that. Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to develop a game that never existed on my old computer because it essentially only had about 3 years of support from its parent company, and then it was all third-party support for the 10 odd years. And then I took about 15 years to actually write it, which is pretty much just development hell all over again. So, and yeah, released also in December 2020 by pure coincidence at the same time as Nox Arceus.
Yeah, I think within a week or so. That was awesome that we got to do it at the same time.
Didn't plan it that way, but happy it happened.
You
Well-
got to raise your children
We
together.
totally did that.
One
well,
advantage of taking extra long on mine is that now I get to have a gap between those releases. And
yeah, welcome to everyone.
We got
Hello.
warmed up for you.
Sorry?
I'm just saying we got to Adam. Golden Flame was just saying, Adam, Realms of Antiquity, Adam, and we got him all warmed up for you. So take it away.
Yep, I'm gonna jump straight into the first question. I'm gonna because I'm not really gonna be answering any of these questions myself. I do feel a bit like an imposter because the only Ultima game I've ever played was Ultima Online. So I feel a little bit like I'm gonna learn a lot today. So I'm excited to hear what y'all have to say and think. First question. This is to everybody because I want to hear all your thoughts. What drew you to retro game development? Whoever speaks gets go first. That's the rules.
That's a good question. I'm going to go first only because, probably arguably World of Antera is almost the least retro, which is kind of surprising to me. But I mean, my first open world role-playing game was Ultima 4. And I remember the day that I sat down and played that game. It's like burned into my memory. My brother, a bit older than me, had gotten it on his Commodore, was playing it, and I would sit and watch him play. I was too young. I mean, not really. I was probably 8 or 9 or something, and I'd watch him play. And one night he said, "Hey, do you want to try it? I'm going to go to bed." And he went to bed in his room, and I booted up a character on his PC, and I started playing it the first time. And I think I stayed up till, God knows what what time in the morning, and it was really like a revelation. It was amazing, and it really embarked me on this journey of not just enjoying video games but having video games have a positive impact on my life. And I really feel like what Richard Garriott did with Ultima and the characters and kind of the story in there kind of taught me a bit about what it took to be a good person in the world. And so working on World of Antera, when I first envisioned this game and started writing for it, it was really from that context. So yeah, personal experience has been just the hugest driving force for me. And I really look forward to sharing that with others who I know also have very similar stories to what I just shared. So yeah.
I think it's interesting because I'm a little bit in the same boat as you, Stefan. I'm also, even though my game looks very retro, it's being developed on a completely modern ecosystem and for only for modern platforms. It's not for retro hardware at all. And I'm making the game because I think old RPGs are a genre unto themselves, and we still get great RPGs, but they're not the same. Like it is a different style of game, and for me, I saw that like the games I missed, they weren't really being made anymore. So I wanted to make it basically to sort of fill the niche that I was missing myself. But I think it would be very interesting to hear from one of you guys who are working on developing games for real old school hardware. What are your motivations for going down such a gnarly road compared to working in a modern language on a modern platform like us other guys are? That would be really interesting to hear a little bit about.
Sure. Well, I can certainly speak to that, and I'm sure Adam will be able to as well. But I mean, there's definitely some common roots here from what Stefan described. All started as a kid playing games, not necessarily understanding them, but like, wow, that's cool, and then learning some programming, and it's like, okay, yeah, I really want to, make games like that, write an Ultima, style game in particular. But I tried different flavors, the wizardry style, even arcade games, just trying to find something, that I could actually do, which I actually didn't. Never really finished anything as a kid. learned a lot, and it always frustrated me that I never did. There were some brick walls that I couldn't get past as a kid, and so to your kind of the nub of your question, Al, it's like, so okay, well, why now? Or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it's been, still go back and do it in that technology. It's basically because I just never really got over the fact that I wasn't able to do it on the original hardware as a kid. It was like this mountain that I tried to climb, but I never reached the summit of. And so I essentially, what happened was I got an Apple II computer in like 2015, 2014, started playing games on it, and the desire just rekindled. The memories came back of like, well, yeah, and I really would have loved to have done that thing that I didn't do. And I don't know, it was just a matter of time when I, started, dabbling around and programming on the Apple II again, and that just launched into, at some point, kind of a full-on effort of like, well, I think I've got the knowledge now to figure things out. Why don't I just do this? And so for me, it was really, it didn't really start as like, making anything resemble the Noxer KS that, was released and kind of a large scale project. It was really just purely a very, like I want to, fill this item on my bucket list to do this specific thing. I don't care if anybody plays it. I didn't even know there was an active Apple II community at the time, really. So it just kind of snowballed from there. Once I saw the interest, what was there, I just kept moving the bar higher and higher, essentially, and things got out of hand, and here we are.
Yeah, very, very similar for me. I continued to use my TI all the way up into like the 90s until I got a PC, and then I packed it away. Then for reasons, I really didn't pursue my education for a while. Then I came back to it. When I did, I was like, I miss hobby programming. And so I pulled my TI out after 8 years in a basement. And it was like, that's basically, I just picked up right where I left off, but this time with a lot more knowledge. And I would say, yeah, I learned basic and stuff as a kid, but could not learn assembly because there was like 4 books total on assembly for the TI. And its processor is completely different from the 6502. So like you can't read other assembly books to learn anything. So it was really frustrating. It wasn't until I actually got into the internet community that you actually start finding good resources that can help you learn that thing. So so yeah, and I just like the challenge of programming on a retro system, seeing like, hey, yeah, it can still do this. It can do the stuff that people like. You can get the performance. It's like I looked at like modern game programming. Like one of my favorite authors actually was Andre Lamott. He writes really good books on video game writing. In fact, he was so good at it that he ended up with a whole line of video game books. But I don't know. It's just not quite the same. I think it's probably easier now than it was in the 90s and 2000s, though, because now there's a lot of good platforms and stuff and tools and libraries you can use. And like, it's not something I would actually. It sounds fun. Like I love the look of Skull the Black Priory. Looks like Commodore 64, but you get all the fun and of a modern platform. Not to mention probably the coolest thing, accessibility. You can do it in different languages. That is one thing you can never do on a retro platform.
Yeah.
You not unless you re-engineer the entire thing from scratch. Single one.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. I think both are very exciting ways to approach the retro genre, and I'm really glad that there's multiple people, doing it kind of in each of those different paths, and it's really exciting some of the stuff that's been created and is in the process of being created, I think.
For me, it's kind of like how the music you grow up with is, for a lot of people, always just going to be their favorite kind of music. 80s forever. Ultima 5 is my favorite game of all time. And when I started this project, the only person who seemed to be making games like that anymore was Jeff Vogel of Spiderweb Games. Made The Exile and Queen's Wish now, Gene Forge, etc. And so I basically wanted to make the game that I wanted to see. Of course, I took so long in doing so that I discovered other people had also been working as long as I had, and have come out with stuff that's probably better than I'm going to wind up with. But there's room for a lot of things. Retro game development was also something that I could do solo. Again, when I started, Game Maker wasn't widely out, if it existed at all yet. Unity didn't really exist yet. And I decided that this was something that I could do in a web browser, which was the earliest form of my game. And it was a tech stack that I could actually work with and do, as opposed to trying to make, a Skyrim or something, which is obviously just entirely out of scope of something that I could do in my evenings after work.
In my case, it was not a traditional, I didn't always want to make a game. I wanted to tell a story. An option was to write a book, but since I grew up with RPGs, playing those old classics and, the Ultimas, the Ultima Underworlds and Betrayed Chrono and so on, I figured they were quite enjoyable, but still I need to grow my skill set to a point that I would be able to create an RPG. It's a massive genre, so there are a lot of skills that you need to master before you can start doing something like that. Especially, once you go into 3D and there's no turning back, so there's a lot to do. So yeah. That's just basically how I started on Call of Sagnar. First it was supposed to be a kind of an iOS, phone-based, text-based, like Darklands having text-based menus, travel on the map. But then once I learned about Unity and the 3D capabilities and how relatively easy it was to work with it, so I switched to 3D and I didn't look back. Yeah.
I am going to. This isn't one of the questions actually on we got prepared, but I do want to throw it out there just because it was mentioned, and I think this is probably the same for a lot of us. We probably got that one or two games that we played either as children or young adults that just like stuck with us. And I'm personally, I'm interested from y'all. What is that game for y'all?
Well, for me, it was Tunnels of Doom, the TI, which was probably the only real CRPG developed during its heyday, and it's basically a 3D dungeon but with two-dimensional combat. And Realms of Antiquity is very obviously inspired. I essentially took Tunnels of Doom and just made it more, took it out of it.
I think that's an awesome question, and I thanks for adding it. I already shared Ultima 4 and 5, 6, 7. Really, the Ultima series was big for me. But moving on from that to consoles and then back to PC, there are a number of games that were sort of somewhat of like an epiphany for me in terms of I've been a game designer and in the game industry for nearly 15 years now. And I think for me, the sort of like the big moments in gaming for me as a designer in terms of what I thought I could do with my skills and the tools that I have. Ultima, definitely. Legend of Zelda. Actually, the Dark Souls series, I'm a really big fan of those games because they really did something when the first one came out. It really did something unique and it kind of turned a genre on its head, so to speak. But then even seeing games like Stardew Valley that were made by a single developer and the level of success that could have and the scope of the game that one person could create, that was actually like a really sort of big moment for me. And that kind of took my own ambition to another level. Now I do have a team, so it's a bit different kind of, ball game that I guess I'm trying to play here. But yeah, I would say those 4 games for sure come to mind constantly. Yeah.
Well, for me, it was definitely Ultima 5, and it actually, played a really kind of a special role in the drive behind the Noxer Chaos project as a whole, because Ultima 5 was the last Ultima on the Apple II platform. After that, it moved over to the IBM PC. And so what I didn't know and had wondered for a long time was there any more of the Apple II machine left beyond what Ultima 5 used? Could there have been something in between Ultima 5 and Ultima 6? Obviously, Ultima 6 was tried to be developed on the Ultima 5, and they abandoned it and moved on. So I quickly decided in the Noxer Chaos project that the mission was going to basically be to see if we could stand on Richard Garriott's shoulders and see if it was possible to create an RPG which pushed the Apple II even further, sort of an Ultima 5.5 from a gameplay technology standpoint. And as it turned out, we succeeded and introduced a variety of features that pushed the frontier, such as advanced special effects during spellcasting, full screen map with high-res text, pop-up windows, and much more, which just was not the norm on the Apple II for sure.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that the game that inspired me the most is probably actually tabletop role playing, and probably D&D in particular, because I grew up playing a lot of games, but I didn't write a single line of code until I was at least 25 or 26 years old. So even though I loved gaming, it never occurred to me that I would ever be able to make games on a computer. I was never the kid kind of writing basic code from a magazine into my Commodore 64. That wasn't me. But I was really into tabletop RPGing and also always being like a game master, and I really loved doing that. And when my group fell apart and I moved away, that was when I kind of started, and that happened at the same time as sort of the indie development. The indie movement started growing, like the movie, like I don't remember what it's called. It's called Indie Games. The Indie Game, the movie, had just come out. I saw it and I was thinking, maybe this is a new hobby. And so basically it came from tabletop gaming, even though obviously my inspiration is also all of the games that you are talking about. So
What edition of D&D did you play in?
I grew up on second edition, but I was very infatuated with third edition when it came out, because that was when we sort of started university and we started really playing a lot, and like really that was sort of the only campaign in my life where we had a group that was able to run for about like 2 or 3 years, which is pretty special for, like, obviously there are some people who play for a long time, but for most people groups disintegrate and then you don't really get any continuity. But that was like kind of the Hamburg Crucible for the Beatles, where we really like got to, it felt a little bit like making a game, because you're writing something for every week and you're preparing something for every week. And so I think, like, also looking at Skald and the combat system in Skald, you'll see it's not dissimilar to third edition D&D actually, so which is a good thing.
It's a really good engine.
Absolutely.
Story here. My brother is a massive tabletop gamer going back, and he got the expert box set with the Earl Otis artwork, Christmas gift. And so pretty much from then on, I've played every edition. So basically everybody's always written an ability score generator in BASIC. But let's do 3d6 times 6. There you go.
Yeah.
I done mine out recently. It actually still works.
But can I just like finish just by saying that it's so interesting when you see old interviews or like Matt Chat interviews with old RPG developers, like the really old one, how many of them got into coding because they wanted to make some kind of tool for their D&D campaign, or a D&D simulator, or a dice roller. Like, even from the moment you only had mainframes at universities in the 70s, that was probably like one of the first things. Okay, I have to do my... So it's one of those interesting things where D&D and computers came into prevalence almost at the same time, and there was obviously a cross-pollination that I think is basically hugely influential, not just on gaming, but on all entertainment media. It's kind of the unsung hero a little bit, because everyone has played D&D at some point. And I looked at it, and looked at coding and thinking, oh man, this would be so cool.
Oh yeah. Part of it is that the role-playing games have their roots in wargaming. And wargaming guys are simulationists. Mm-hmm. So they were looking at computers going, oh man, I could get this working. It would be the perfect game. Mm-hmm. Obviously, since then, role-playing has moved more into the narrative area. Frankly, I like a good tabletop game that tries to get away from things that a computer can. Because a computer can do all that perfectly, but what it can't do is go, just +2 to the roll, you know?
Right.
Or, just roll twice and give me the better.
Yeah, something I just wanted to add, because it struck me when when you were talking about Scald, and actually, what one of the bigger influences to me taking on World of Antera with the team here at 80 Monkeys was initially I came across like I played the Spiderweb games and a lot of retro games, and I'd been playing them, and I never really thought that I wanted to make a game like that. But I was trying to figure out what direction I was heading with my game studio. We were working on a mobile game, and I came across a game on the internet. It's kind of the game nobody like we shall not name. It's like Voldemort of retro gaming. It I found on Kickstarter. It didn't turn into anything. But from that game, I actually ended up finding Scald, and then I found Realms of Antiquity, and then I found Nox Archaeist. And it was actually right around that time where I was like, holy crap, this is actually what I want to do. Like it just struck me. And I came into the studio one day and I said to the guys, and at the time I think there was maybe 6 of us, and I said, guys, I think I know what I want to do. And I was a bit nervous because my teams, they're young, like none of them have played Ultima.
Mhm.
And I actually sat them down in front of Ultima 4. And that was cool. Actually, no, I sat them down in front of Ultima 5. And man, they just ended up dinking around trying to shoot people with cannons and stuff like that. But yeah, they fell in love with that concept. It quickly became our dream game, but you guys really had a big role in that. And so I've never actually really thought about that, but yeah, totally. So I wanted to add that in. Thank you all.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot.
And that is the great thing about Ultima 5 is you can dink around and shoot people with cannons. That's definitely part of the appeal. I already said that Ultima 5 was my favorite game. The other thing that maybe most inspired me towards trying to do game dev stuff when I was a kid, the kind of game that I tried to make, I briefly dabbled in trying to make a Pool of Radiance but I made several attempts at doing a Zork.
Mm.
And so Zork and Infocom is one of the other big inspirations. And then somewhat more modernly, I might point at Planescape Torment.
Yeah, pointed, in fact, it was a 99er who reverse engineered the Infocom engine and actually figured out how to generate.
Wow.
Does anyone else want to talk about their inspirations before we move on? Just want to double check.
I can just say that, I already talked about Betrayed Grundor, and if you Google Betrayed Grundor, you'll see my name appear everywhere, so there's not much to add to it. But yeah, that was the game that introduced me into RPGs, into gaming in general. I played it with a dictionary because my English was not that good back then, and still, it impacted me so deeply. The story, the characters, the music, everything was so different than anything else out there. In the end, spoiler alert, one of the main character dies, and I was literally crying for that. So that was it definitely impacted me greatly. So
yeah, I think that's something. I think that seems to be a very common thread that I've especially. Anywhere where English isn't like the main speaking language, I guess, or first language is. I talk to a lot of people who have played video games or tabletop games, and a lot of them are like, that's how I learned English. Like that is a thing that exists. So it's also really interesting to hear that there, people out there who are like, yep, that's how I learned English. So yeah. Let's move on to. I kind of jumped in there and just threw a question in. That was my bad, but I guess I'll return to the track. So we talked about what drew you to retro game development, all of you. So does anyone want to talk about what the biggest challenges to that is for them personally?
That's why my hair's receding. I'm actually really interested to hear this because I think we're all going to have maybe, some different experience of this. The biggest challenge for me really is funding a game studio and finding people who believe in what we're doing to, support us financially. We started working on World of Venterra years ago, like 3 years ago. And during that time, ran out of funds. We, like me and some team members actually didn't get paid for a period of time. When COVID hit, we ran out of funds, and then it happened again. We actually ended up taking on a work for hire project from a company that had sold a bunch of NFTs, and they approached us and said, "Hey, we would like you to make a game for us." And we turned down 2 other companies that were kind of had the same pitch, and we decided to work on this. So we were doing a work for hire contract, and it's a really innovative, like, player versus player card battle game that we designed. So it was like real time online. It was a really sort of a daunting project, but it funded us to get to this point, and now we're about 20 days away from our Kickstarter. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is like trying to hold a team together, and this is where my experience is going to be quite different, from others. I do want to share this though, that, like, when I started 801 Monkeys, it was just me in one little room doing 100% of the front end coding, the art and the design for like a year or two, and like going through the process of learning how to code properly to do the things I wanted to do and stuff like that. But one of the things that I've always sort of sought in myself is like my leadership ability and my ability to bring a team together in a group and share a vision. Before I founded 801 Monkeys, I was lead game designer, and I worked with like 30 to 40 people on that team. And so I just realized, like, if I really want to do this, if I want to make games on my own, I need to do it with other people. But for me, that really is the biggest challenge. There's so many other challenges this is where I think you guys will know a lot of, is like wearing multiple hats, having to be the marketing person and the the social media manager and the designer and the developer, or at least the project manager in my case. I have to constantly talk to the team and be like, well, guys, we have to be okay with this process being like this, because we just don't have somebody to do it for us. So we can't, we can't beat ourselves up for not doing everything perfectly. As long as the player experience that we're creating and the path we're heading in is the best it can be, how we get there doesn't really need to matter, So that's big. There's a challenge, and it's something that we're really committed to. Building a studio that doesn't have those challenges anymore, where we can hire the team members that can fill those goals. And whether that comes from our Kickstarter campaign or comes from a publisher partnership, we're confident that that's going to happen in the next few months. So it's just a question is what road do we end up heading down? That'll, I think if we were to talk again in end of September, early October, I'll have an answer for that. But this is the path we're on now. So bootstrapped, lean, keeping a team together, keeping them motivated and productive, wearing multiple hats. One of the big challenges of being an indie game developer.
Well, I totally concur with Stefan on that, relating to project management and teams and hats. Even with a team, you end up with a coat rack full of hats, no doubt. But what since Stefan eloquently spoke to those challenges, I'd like to speak to some technical challenges. So Nox Chaos was developed from scratch in 6502 assembly language, and as mentioned before, runs on physical Apple II computers and modern computers, the latter of which is done through the Micro M8 emulator, which has been wrapped into a click-and-go application to launch the game. So writing assembly code for an 8-bit processor or for a 16-bit processor, which I believe the TI-99 is that Adam did his on. But writing assembly code for a processor like that and fitting a game into 128K of RAM is both fun and very difficult. For context, 128K is less space than an average email. And coding and assembly means that there are no safety nets. For example, problems like overflowing arrays are common, which a high-level language, even on the older machines, will prevent you from doing. But the high-level languages are too inefficient in order to be able to produce the speed and memory efficiency that you need to make an Ultima level game on those older platforms. And overflowing arrays. Well, that happens because there's no data structures. You're just dealing with raw memory that you happen to choose to treat like a data structure. So an overflow means that you're essentially in that environment essentially means you're clobbering some random memory address which might contain other data or even other code, and this can lead to some very bizarre intermittent crashes, which can be really tough to solve. Those are not the fun points of the project, but there are many other fun points, of course, that make this all worth it, dealing with these things.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I like to refer to assembly programming as atomic programming. Because on the one hand, yes, you're down right at the atomic level, but then the best part about it is every single instruction does something. I cannot count the number of times I've looked at like stack traces, and it's just like all this code is just jumping to someplace else over and over and over again. It's like, when does it actually do something?
And
Whereas
when it's in the wrong place, when it's run away.
And then those bugs where you have like just some random routine is accidentally writing data somewhere else, those are nightmares to hunt down. I am fortunate that I did most of my development in a very good emulator called Classic 99, and the author of it, Mike Brent, keeps it updated and active, and he put an active debugger that lets me say, when you write to this, when the write goes to this address, stop, so that I can actually go and find out where it was and what caused that. So that was very invaluable. The one thing I miss, unit tests. Unit tests would be so grand to catch regressions. Half the time I've been doing patches, I've ended up introducing regressions that then I have to go and stomp back down on. So
I think for the people who are watching this who aren't really familiar with coding and sort of the whole workflow of coding, I think it's difficult to explain how different what me and some of the other more modern guys are doing is to what Adam and Mark is doing. Like it's almost like doing the same job, but almost like not being able to look at your screen, or I don't know how to compare it, but it's extremely it's a lot more complicated than what we're doing. Like the software we're using, like the modern software you would use to write code, it will tell you, just like even trying to start the game, it will identify most of the bugs for you and tell you, oh, there's something going on here. You're trying to cram too much into this memory or something like that. But the issue that some of you guys are dealing with is that the game will compile. It will always do what you tell it to do. There are no guardrails, so the bugs are super insidious, I guess, which are literally the worst kinds of bugs, because you might not even realize that they are there, and they can be super difficult to reproduce because it can be some kind of, it could only happen on the full moon on a Friday, like there is on the summer solstice, compared to when we're working in our modern tool sets, which is constantly popping up error messages saying, something's wrong here, look here. So it almost can't be compared. And I like, hats off, because I am extremely impressed that you have sort of the mental discipline to be able to do something like that. I mean, I'm incredibly impressed in what you guys are doing.
I saw a video of a gentleman in Southeast Asia building this swimming pool, and it was really elaborate, and he did it all by hand, and he had all these custom tools he built, and he literally carried pails of water to fill the pool with, and then I, like where I live, my neighbor put in a pool over the weekend, and these big machines came in and tools came in, and so when you were speaking, I kind of thought of those two comparisons. Yeah. Fascinating. You know what? And what's wonderful about that comparison is the pool that gentleman made, the sort of handmade one, had a quality that no other modern pool could have. The way that he, smoothed the edges with his hand and the materials he used and stuff like that. So yeah, really interesting to compare the way that you guys are developing versus the way that we are. So, and there's like middle ground where Scald, you're doing things a little bit more retro in terms of your approach to development than, for instance, World of Antera. So we're really like, there's this wide spectrum, and then of course we have 3D, and I just find it really fascinating. So I think we could probably talk about this for hours, just literally like how do we approach our code base and building mechanics in the game. How do we manage our visuals? And I find it really fascinating. I'd love to learn more. So this could be another
Maybe
like
next time.
a follow-up just to really get into the technical side of things. And really fascinating. So
Yeah, I mean, I
just
do.
It's great.
I do feel like the working on the more modern hardware, it's like it's a science, and then these other two over here are just sorcerers.
yeah, 100%.
My quick answer to the challenge is getting it done, avoiding burnout, and then, as has come up a couple of times, having to wear so many hats.
On
Yeah,
that, I want to. Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
go on.
I did want to add one of the main challenges I had was, Mark had 128K, I had 32. Like, the original TI was really bootstrap limited on memory, and it was all borked out. They have separate video memory, stuff like that. And I tried to write the game to fit in that. I was going to just offload everything to disk and load in data segments as needed. And it was so frustrating. I fell into this pattern of redesigning from scratch, like redesigning the whole engine. And I did that like 5 times. That's probably like 12 years of the effort was just endlessly cycling back and forth. And then I finally decided to use this advanced memory card that had actually existed since the early 90s, but somebody, a user group, did a great implementation of it. And it gave me a megabyte of CPU memory. And that, the minute I did that, the project was done in 3 years. So, sometimes you just have to get past certain.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to quickly add, just from a design perspective, for people who are watching and really wondering about the player experience, because there's a lot of challenges around creating a retro game today. And I think some of that is around how do you bring some of those mechanics to a potentially a modern, audience. And I know that we're not all necessarily building a game for a modern audience, but the truth is if you're building a retro experience today, you have an opportunity to share that with people who haven't had that experience or didn't grow up with that game. And so what I find with World of Antera, that there were some game mechanics, and this is like what was said about Scald. There were some game mechanics that I really cherished from these, retro gaming experiences. And I felt that they had, were still totally relevant. In fact, I believed that gamers today, even those who didn't grow up with these games, would really appreciate these game mechanics. But in order to bring it to them, they were going to have to be modernized, and there's going to have to be some innovation there in how we tackled that. So a really good example is in World of Antera, we have designed a very Ultima-esque dialogue system. And the reason why this became important is because when I sat the team down in front of Ultima 5, one of the first things that struck them was, oh my God, I feel like I'm really talking to these, characters. And they hadn't had that experience. And I thought, wow, that's a really powerful thing to say. And so, I sat down and started designing, and it took like a bunch of iterations over multiple months to come up with a dialogue system that we felt really worked. I remember sending a really early sort of prototype to Scald, and so like figuring that out, how can we bring this experience to a modern gamer, is something that's been really important to us and a big challenge as well. So yeah.
Modernizing is indeed a process, especially if you're basing yourself on an old school game. But in my case, the biggest challenges are 2. The first one is simply the scale of the project, and for a long time I've been a one-man team. I've been since joined by a musician, a sound effects guy, and then an additional programmer who steps in from time to time. The scale is the challenge is to make a huge game, and in a normal amount of time, not taking you 20 years to have it. So this is one of them, and the other is particular to my project. Actors, logistics, finding a huge hall, put up the green screen, the lights each time, finding people, coordinating all that. And then making sure that you're taking all the shots that you will need in the game. Because if you miss one angle or something and then you're screwed, you have to redo it all over again. So this is what I've been struggling with, because the technical challenges, there are years. I haven't encountered one for years now. Working with Unity, a modern engine, modern technologies, it's not an issue anymore.
All right, well, I'm gonna jump on to the next question because I want to. So this is kind of a little bit of a jump because we talked about challenges, we talked about our projects. So we're gonna jump back to like that sort of question about our favorite games, but in a sense of like retro. Like, what does it mean to you? Like, what does retro inspired mean? And being that we all have already, we're all different age ranges, we all have different games that we enjoyed in the past, and we all come from different places. I'm interested to hear, what does retro inspired like mean to you?
So I've thought a lot about this because my game gets a lot of retro cred because of the look of the game, and in particular sort of the later iterations that we're going to be showing off more and more. We're really leaning into sort of the pixel perfect low resolution look. So obviously people see it and they think retro, but beyond that, there is less. The game is less retro than you would think. Really, I think I think like if it had been reskinned, if the look only had been reskinned, no one would think it was extremely retro. Really, it's just a hardcore role-playing game. But I think like a really good sort of phrase about retro-ness in a game is like evoking nostalgia for something that you maybe didn't even experience, or something that is like the nostalgia you are touching is for our idealized sort of platonic ideal of a of an old school role-playing game. Like if you compare Skald to a game from the late 80s or early 90s, it looks nothing like it. Like there is no comparison. You will instantly be able to tell that this is a very modern game, but that's not really the point. In my design pillar is not to make like a copy of a game, or like a game that is like something that could actually run on old hardware. It's more like evoking those feelings, and I don't mean that in a derogatory or kind of like predatory way. I think it's equally valid to do something like that, especially also because there are a lot of qualities with especially with like the old school look. There are a lot of like logistical qualities as well, because it's easy to make pixel art in a large amount when you have low resolution, for instance. So it's not just like retro for the sake of retro. There is actually some technical reasons why this is a good idea, and also sort of being able to tap into that kind of like I said, like the romanticized ideal of what our childhood experiences playing role-playing games is very important for me. And I think that's I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's sort of an interesting thing to make a game, to build a game around.
And I'd like to like just to also make a point when you're talking about your game and retro inspired. When I played it, there was one thing I said to you that I was like, oh, this is basically when you hit like the start button or whatever and it goes like into the pause screen, and I said to you like that was like a vivid, and I don't know what it was, it just hit me and I was like, whoa, like the sound, the way that it did it, I was like not like transported back to my childhood, but that was the feeling it gave me. And I told you that and you were like, what? Because that's not your experience of what retro inspired is. Yeah. That's not what you were thinking about, but it obviously was in the back of your mind because you presented that as something that you'd either seen or experienced, or it just came naturally to you. And I had that visceral reaction to that. And so I think that's just another important point when it comes to retro inspired. Like you said, it's very personal, and when it comes to video games especially.
Yeah, and I just want to add like really quickly, because it's very much in the same vein, that I think one of the most important things, and the reason I really love working in this medium, kind of the low resolution, old school look, is that it takes game development back to a point in time where you would still have to make, even though the graphics could be beautiful, you would still have to make a lot of sort of theater of the mind things going on. And so you're kind of playing on like a larger spectrum of feelings with the text. Like the text has to be very short and succinct and evocative. Like you may, even for me, like the way the fonts work, and maybe I only get 3 lines, like literally 3 lines, maybe 200 symbols, and like for each screen, even though I have memory for as much as I want, but I can only show a little bit on screen at the same time. So like you really kind of have to hit every time, like, and that's something I really love. Compared to like if you're doing something where it's like a pizza with all the ingredients on all the time, it kind of not, too much of something doesn't really taste anything. So that's what I really, really love about this as sort of like an expressive medium.
Yeah, the less pixels you have to represent something, the more constrained you are in and I agree with you totally. I think that is a unique challenge, but it's something that actually elevates these games. And I also agree that the moment you start working with pixel art, you are evoking something, and I think I think you need to be responsible for that. You need to be responsible for the fact that people are going to look at your game and it's going to remind them of some experience they've had in the past. That doesn't mean that you're trying to recreate those experiences necessarily. I think there absolutely is room. There are so many fan-made games I've played. Obviously, I played Realms of Antiquity and Nox and loved them, and they transported me back to a moment in time in my life where gaming was what it was, and that's hugely valuable. And I'm on the side of the fence with the Scald project in that I really believe that there's a balance in what World of Antera can be that is both a modern and a retro game, and when that balance is struck just right, it resonates with a really wide audience, and I get an opportunity to share some of these retro experiences with new gamers, and I think that's a huge opportunity. So yeah.
I actually just want to, like, if it's okay, skip on. I'd like to ask my next question because I think this really rolls really well into it. We're talking about pixel art. So what are the pros and cons of pixel art?
I can start here. So, pros is, well, I always enjoyed pixel art because it was a lot more forgiving. It's like I'm a left-hander. I always liked keyboards because my writing is terrible, and and it feels like pixel art is just friendlier. I had an art teacher in high school tell me that my paint signature looked like a second grade. That doesn't really do one good for one's confidence there. But pixel art is really cool because first off, you have a limited number of colors, which means you really have to get creative with how you balance them together. Most little computers could only support, like, they'd either have, like, you can have this resolution, but you only can use 2 colors or 4 colors, or in the case of the Apple II, 6, because Wozniak is a genius. But on my own TI, it had 15 colors, and in the highest graphic mode, you can have 2 colors for every row of 8 pixels. You could have all colors on screen, which was a big deal, but then you were only limited to 2 colors in an 8-pixel block or line. And that's challenging, but it can be overcome. In fact, the MSX system has the same video chip as the TI, and their games look fantastic if you go and look up screenshots. It's like, wow, what did these guys do? And I even took some of their art. I'm like, what are these colors? Why are they mixing orange, like light red and magenta? And then I put it on screen on an actual monitor. And oh, that works. Because the NTSC fuzz helps blur it out, and it actually makes it look really cool. So that actually is where I started when I was doing all my like artwork. A lot with the monsters, because the monsters are the fun ones. And it was just really cool. And then I would usually go down and put it on my actual TI to compare it to modern, sharp edge pixels versus fuzzed NTSC. Okay, yep, no, it passes. And so that, obviously color limitations, that's probably the biggest problem. The other problem was that balancing modern and old. I actually originally had all white text, and then I realized on the old monitors it just glared out at you because of the monitor glare. So I ended up granulating the bottom with gray and then a light cayenne, and that helped makes the text go from light to dark so that I could put it all single line spaced without it actually hurting your eyes to read.
Interesting. You know, it's for us, it's kind of the inverse. Working with pixel art in Unity, we are like, you know, it opens the door up to us, you know, doing more and more and more, and that's not necessarily a good thing, you know, because you're, you know, like having this mission of wanting to quote unquote modernize pixel art, you know, and it there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down. One of the biggest one was our lighting system that we have in World of Antera. Basically, we mocked up a very simple lighting system that would basically make sprite shadows, and then we just kind of stretch them a bit depending on the angle of the light, and that was going to be it. And our lead developer said, "You know what? I have an idea. Let me work on this for a few weeks." So we basically let him do it, and he came back and he had generated this real-time lighting system for pixel art that basically simulated 3D. And there was many times where we were like asking ourselves, is this really the rabbit hole we want to go down? It's a lot of work. But man, it turned into something really incredible. But we do have to really, you know, pull ourselves back. For instance, another conversation we've had multiple discussions here in the studio on was our game's pixel perfect. We don't scale the pixels at all. And now we could. And a lot of pixel art games, modern pixel art games, do scale the pixels. Because don't have those constraints anymore. But our art director was like, no, like we're not, absolutely never ever doing that. And so the way that we render the game is we render it at the lowest possible resolution, and then we scale it up for the monitor. And by doing that, anything that's positioned or plopped in the game always ends up becoming pixel perfect within the game. So there's a lot of like processes we have to do to actually ensure that we're keeping that, you know, that pixel perfect kind of view and that authentic pixel art, you know, experience. So it's been interesting. So it's like an inverse challenge for us than what you guys have.
But I think what you're kind of talking about is very important if you are considering doing a pixel art game. Is that you have to think a lot about like what does it mean to make a pixel art game, and especially the sort of the question of do you scale the pixel art to fit the screen? Do you allow for fuzzy pixels, or do you go for a pixel perfect look? Because a pixel perfect look, there's actually quite a few hoops you have to jump through, especially for a game like Scald, where the screen is basically a fixed ratio. Because as I remember in World of Antera, you can change the size of the rendering, or like the camera size to fit the screen aspect. I presume.
We do a lot of math to make sure that it's never breaking the pixels, but that's the thing that's really important to us, is that we don't want to have ever any fuzzy pixels. In fact, we want you to be able to take a screenshot of any movement in the game and have it be perfectly aligned, every pixel aligned. So there's never a pixel, like if the character is animating across the screen, they're not half over a pixel sort of thing, right? So there's a lot of work that we sort of had to do to ensure that integrity, that foundation was there as we went and built on top of it. So yeah.
Same here.
I'm so envious of you guys, especially those who work on real hardware that have a fixed ratio, you know, fixed resolution. You can basically design for that resolution. I think it's a big challenge today's UIs with Windows and resizable stuff, and so it looks good on any resolution, any monitor.
That's the
really
box
tough,
is comfortable. We'll stay in the box, right, Mark?
That's cool, but I don't envy how hard it is for you to.
We built our games for mobile previously, and mobile's just a mess in terms of aspect ratios and screen shapes, and it was like just brutal. But World of Antera, I have a really widescreen monitor. I recently made an upgrade to a Samsung. It's like crazy wide, and World of Antera
is it the
looks
G9?
Beautiful. Yes, it is.
I've got the same one.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it. But yeah, it plays on the widescreen without any of the issues, but that's because of the work that we did ensuring the integrity of the game from a pixel perfect, you know, things. So I just
Yeah,
I thought,
limitations. Yeah.
what's that?
Limitations are really the source of are the fuel for creativity. So you have to
Absolutely.
impose some. Yeah, in my case, I've imposed myself that since my game is a 3D game, but I still do pixel art. Inventory items, and even the textures in the game, they're all pixelated, and but I still have to make sure for every single object to compare it with the rest, so the density of the pixels is the same throughout all the objects. I mean, even some old school games didn't do that. They would stretch texture and so on. But I'm trying to keep the pixel aspect and the ratio the same across everything. So no matter what you look, which objects you look towards, it's the same pixel size throughout.
Yeah. Yeah, I think things that like that are, at least for us pixel connoisseurs, that's really important. but
Pixel
it's also,
connoisseurs.
yeah, but I mean, like, because I'm always thinking like some of these things that I'm extremely hung up on, it might be stuff that people who play the game will never notice, but maybe they would have noticed if it wasn't there. That's kind of what's hard to tell almost.
Yeah.
But I think like for me, I remember starting the game, like the first kind of like dipping my toes into it, and I was sort of I quickly found out that if I made something that was pixel art and low resolution, I could do a bunch of the art myself, which is a big plus. Obviously, you can do programmer art. And like I was working and I was why is this still taking so long? And then I realized that of course I need a limited color palette. If I have every color, I will just infinitely be tweaking colors, and I'm not good enough of an artist to know what goes. Like I don't have the color theory down as well. But then once I sort of realized that working with pixel art means you have to be really disciplined in sort of identifying what are your limitations, what are your design goals, like what's your design pillars from an art perspective on your project. And that makes it hugely. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like that makes it a lot easier to work with, and also very rewarding. And I think that's when people start to see like the quality of the work. Like, there's actually a lot of thought that's gone into this, and I think that's important.
One thing I've noticed with pixel artists is a lot of them start off in black and white. Just do a straight up black and white piece of the artwork you want. Then put your color in after, because it kind of forces you try to make it look as good as possible with just one color, and then start adding in the color afterwards to get your shading and your drop shadow and all of that, and that helps kind of discipline you, because you start at the absolute limited side and then work your way towards what you.
Actually, funny, just something really funny to share quickly. My art director came up to me the other day and he said, Stefan, something that I really want in our game, I want a single pixel character. And the reason why he wanted a single pixel character was because he wanted me and us to write something something compelling enough that we could make the player really care about this single pixel character. Because it was like a statement that he wanted to make in our game. So this is a spoiler for anybody who's interested in World of Antera, but the single pixel character will most likely be like a fly or something like that. But it's a really interesting, design challenge, and
not a butterfly.
Brings you to, well, we have butterflies, yeah. Probably way over detailed butterflies but that's just how we do it. But
even lemmings are at pixel tall, so
yeah. Well, that's actually that's what was driving him. His experience of playing lemmings and really caring about these pixels.
Yeah.
And it was like he's just so fascinated by the fact that you could have that emotional connection with this one dot, and but the broader conversation on pixel art is how do you create an emotional connection with something that's just 16 or whatever, little dots. And it's quite fascinating. And that's what's one of the most wonderful things I think about retro gaming is one of the things we talked about is the more you go into realism, the less your brain is required to be creative. So like if you read a book, you're imagining, the environments and the characters and everything. You're imagining the visuals essentially. And as you move into gaming, the early gaming still had that. You played Ultima and you were like still imagining this world. But then eventually you get to Skyrim and stuff and you're no longer imagining, you're sort of being brought on this this adventure, this journey.
Yeah.
And so going back to making a pixel art game is like, that's one of the things we constantly talk about, is like, we're inspiring creativity in players in a way, and we're inspiring imagination. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. And so when the art director came to me and said, I wanted to have a character that's 1 pixel, that's just him taking that and like making a statement about that sort of mission. So, yeah.
It's
I have
very
a
hard
very-
not to go. Sorry, it's very hard not to go overboard with details.
Yeah.
If you put too much details in, then the player imagination doesn't have to work so hard.
Yeah.
So that's a really, you should be really careful about that.
I have a very different set of pros and cons about working with pixel art, in as much as I am absolutely not a visual artist. Like, even the programmer art concept, just no. I made a couple of tiles by like bringing up the Ultima 5 tile set and kind of not directly copying, but basically being like, okay, this is what a chair has to look like. So
We've probably all done that.
like any kind of art, I'm visual art. I'm no good at making it, so you have to get it from somewhere, which is a con. Pro is especially if you're working in tiles like the early Ultimas or something, there's places where you can get them. Game Dev Market, I've bought a bunch of tiles off of there. There's various free tile sets out there that are like, the licenses, feel free to use this so long as you're not charging more for using this. So I initially had like the Ultima 4 upgrade project tiles, plus a bunch of tiles I stole from roguelikes, plus some tiles that I bought from Game Dev Market. And then I had this mishmash of tiles that didn't have any kind of unified look. And so a year or so ago, far too late in the project to do this kind of thing, I did just hire a freelancer to do a tile set for me, and that is still in progress. And then that's been a new experience in that, like, there's a lot of tiles that look great individually, and then when you try to put a table on top of the floor graphic, and it's just like, oh, those colors weren't distinct enough, and it's washing out. Oh, this creature animating here, it's hard to see when it's standing on grass. Should I be black outlining things? Should I, like, there's a bunch of ways that you can do it. The question of, like, when I started, my tiles are 32 by 32 pixels, but the Ultima 4 upgrade project is 16 by 16, so I just doubled them up, and then I would bring in roguelike tiles that are 32 by 32, and then if you put them next to each other, if they're both on the same scale, if they're both like terrain, that didn't work. So I literally went and de-resed some roguelike tiles, but then you can put like a more detailed item on top of a less detailed piece of terrain, and that actually looked fine. So like that was interesting. And then, so the new art that I'm going with is 32 by 32, but has a very restricted color palette. So it doesn't look as pixelated as my previous stuff, but it looks more pixelated in that you get the color jumps. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different dials that you can tweak for where you want to put the constraints in. There are games that do 16 by 16, but a million colors, and they look, they're fine. They look good, but like the constraint can be in color. It can be in pixel depth. It can be in whether or not things can stack on each other or not, or whether you only see the top thing. And that's a lot of stuff that you don't have to think about when you're just, when you're working in 3D with meshes and textures and stuff, and just, that kind of thing. That has its own set of challenges that I am not nearly, up for. But this is at least a set of challenges that I can try to hack at.
Because I
16
think
by 16?
Sorry, what was the question?
Are your characters 16 by 16?
Not at this point. Each tile is 32 by 32, but we've restricted it to a 64 color palette.
I see. Interesting. What about Scald?
16 by 16.
Yeah.
But the characters are slightly bigger now, so it's basically just the world grid is 16 by 16. But that's also like that's also something I think a lot of people don't realize about pixel art. I think a lot of people think pixel art is easier in a way. It may be faster to create individual assets, but having like a good pixel art, maybe especially tile-based pixel art, takes a lot of engineering because it's like basically creating a hugely complex Lego set in a sense, where all the pieces have to go together and you have to be able to combine it both in colors and how the shadows fall and how the lines, how it aligns with each other. And then exactly as you say, Golden Flame, how does it look when you put a fork on top of this table? Like things you wouldn't believe, but it all has to work, and you have to literally solve every problem like this. But that's also what's hugely rewarding about pixel art. I think that you can basically sit and kind of like find good solutions to this, and then when you find a good solution, it shows in the game. People can actually tell that, yeah, this actually looks. I don't know why it looks good, but this looks good. That's kind of the
One, I was gonna say I some of my artwork, which Realms of Antiquity, obviously all the tiles are 8x8. Yay! The combat graphics are 16 by 16, but boss monsters can be 32 by 32. Those were the funnest to draw because then I had the biggest color range. And actually, what I would do is I would find like photos of animals and stuff on Google and take them, and then I would just take the picture and draw a grid line, and then I would approximate it in the thing to get it down. That's how like I got like, tarantula. I found one of a tarantula just sitting there, and then one rearing up with its legs, and so that's how I got my passive attacking mode.
We literally just released spiders, a gameplay video with spiders in it, and they rear up. But ours are 32 by 32. So it's interesting. Even just there is like there's the spectrum of, and going from 8 and 16 and 32, there's the similar challenges throughout there, but there's also unique challenges that start cropping up the bigger you go as well. I don't know how we compare to the 3D game that's being made in terms of how many pixels those end up being, but
Well, like
In my end, yeah, I don't have a tile set. Sorry, I
No,
don't
go
have a
ahead.
tile set, but I'm still using 3D tiles for terrain. I'm creating, individual chunks, and they all have to match together. Still the same. The texture has to match, kind of. I use some kind of tricks for that, but
what is the resolution of those tiles?
it's 124.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's still
Interesting.
high, but the tiles are 10 by 10 meters, so they're
Right.
fairly large. And I'm using 3 meters of elevation, 3, 6, and 9. And I'm basing, the corners have to match with each and every other tile. There are some exceptions, but yeah, that's definitely a challenge.
Right. Yeah.
So, what are your unique challenges for recreating? Because we have people here working new engines and old engines. So, what are the unique challenges for recreating old experiences? I think we touched upon that with the pixel graphics, but why not go a little bit more in depth in general experiences?
Yeah, I mean, this is continuing with the pixel art conversation, but I think it ties into this is we wanting to make a modern role-playing game with pixel art. We knew that players wanted to be able to customize their characters. And that's a whole bag of, worms that typically you're really restricted with pixel art. We ended up designing a system where basically all of our animations are layered, and we had to map out what animations we want, what animations we could reuse, because every time we add an animation to like a player character, every item, every equipable item would have to be animated to match that animation. But in our game, what you ended up with is these hand animated characters that can swap out armor on the character, but the armor is actually animated. And it's a really challenging sort of balancing act, because as a designer, I'll go and say, hey, I want the player to be able to do this. And then they're like, oh, we can't do that, because if we do that, then actually, here's a really good example. I want the player to be able to swim in the water. And he's like, there's no way we're doing swimming animations for every piece of equipment. And then I sort of thought about it for a moment. I'm like, well, then make the player take all their clothes off. And he was like, oh, that we could do that. So now you have to dump your gear on the beach, and then you can swim across the little island to go and explore it, but you're you have the risk of going and not having your gear if there's a fight over there. It's a really interesting, like, sort of like kind of balancing act that we do, that sometimes we design around it, sometimes we do art around it, or sometimes we just can't do it because we're constrained by that system and our desire to want to have these customizable characters with hand animated pixel art. Yeah. So I don't know if that had anything to do with the question you asked, but sort of
No,
struck
I mean, you just
interesting.
exactly. It's a
What we're
challenge,
doing.
right? And
Yeah.
it's like I said, recreating all the experiences, but again, trying to mesh it with what the players expect and what they want to do at the same time. So yeah, absolutely, totally.
Mark, I would be interested in hearing from you because, as you alluded to earlier, not only did you make a game on really old software, as did you, Adam, but also Nox added a lot of innovations. I know that you had a lot of sort of modern design stuff that people didn't even think was possible on an Apple II, and I would like to hear a little bit from you as well on this point.
Sure. And we did touch on that a little bit earlier, and I definitely have some thoughts on that about the importance of the modern innovations in retro development. I think it's very important, and one thing that my team and I recognize is that most players of Nox Archaeus would likely have been kids in the 1980s and had tons of time to play games, uh, who are now adults and may still have an interest, but have a lot less time. So to that end, we tried to incorporate various quality of life improvements that were inspired by, I'll just say, later games. I mean, this might be, because Apple II, we're talking about like 1980 to 1989. So these might be improvements inspired by games of the 90s or the 2000s, not necessarily modern like 2022. But for example, we incorporated things like a quest log, which just didn't exist on 8-bit RPGs, or at least not on Apple II ones. The ability to save the game from anywhere, that started to creep in a little bit towards the end, but we kind of took it to another level with some extra save slots, and because we know you're going to get that interruption. Your kids need something, or your spouse needs something. Or you gotta put it down to go to that thing in 10 minutes. It just happens. And then additionally, we thought people really just don't have time to memorize 24 different keys anymore. And while we were not able to like have a mouse-driven UI on the Apple II, that just wouldn't have been practical. That kind of capability only came in at the end of the Apple II era, on the very last Apple II model, the Apple II GS, and we thought, no, we're really going for the mainstream, running on the original hardware. We wanted it to run on the bulk of the original hardware, so that wasn't viable. What we were able to do was streamline the user interface to be menu driven, primarily menu driven, and additionally use pop-up windows and things for different points of interaction, so that it became a much more approachable game. We think, and our players have confirmed and told us, a much more approachable game as a result of these things, easier to pick up and set down, etc. Like we need in our adult lives.
Yeah, I had much the same experience. I went menu driven right away just because writing a text parser in assembly is a pain. I think I only have it in one place, and it's when you enter in character names. Other than that, nothing. But I did end up putting a lot of. I didn't have a quest log, but I had like a help screen that tells you what all the icons are and gives you the basic key commands, because you can write the manual. You can tell them to read the manual. They will not read the manual. So you might as well just make the game so it's as easy as possible.
Yeah.
But one of the things I ended up doing a lot of quality of life changes as I've been patching is like equipment. It used to be you had to unremove something first before you could put something in, and now nope, it'll just swap things out for you. And if you're trying to do something like swap two weapons, a weapon and shield for a two-handed, it'll go, no, you got to remove the shield first, because I don't know if you have room in your back. So and similar things.
it's funny that I ended up with the same issue, in trying to do the same thing with automating the ready and unready, and I don't even remember why, but somehow I ended up at the exact same point that the system could figure it out, except if you were doing something with a shield. For some reason, you had to manually unready that, and it just told you. So it's funny we ended up in the same place there.
Oh yeah, I was kind of helped by the fact that there's a streamer who's playing the game, and he's a good guy. He also he doesn't. It's like he's one of those guys that he forgets why he went into a room. You know, it's like he never remembers anything. He never interacts with anything. He's always like, I wonder why that happened. So here I am feverishly putting in notifications that just because this one player is like showing me, it's like, nope, you actually have to tell them you've got the wrong ammunition equipped. Take it out, and then you can equip the weapon.
I mean, honestly, it's the best kind of like person who's playing it is the best kind of tester, right? Like this is stuff you wouldn't even think of, and you see somebody else play it, and you're like, oh, wait a second here.
Yep, exactly. Testers.
We've actually paid in the past for gameplay videos. There's a few platforms where you can send your game, and it's really inexpensive, but people will play. You can say play for 1 minute or 2 minutes, and you can tell them exactly what part of the game to play, and they will video themselves with a mic playing it and send that video back. And getting to see people play your game and experience the things, you realize how much you take for granted that you understand about your game that they're just not going to for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, I had some friends play an earlier version of my game who had never played in Ultima and aren't even gamers, but they were like, "You're my friend, I want to see what you've been working on." And then having them say what issues they had getting in at the beginning of the game and figuring out how to do stuff was definitely somewhat revelatory.
What was I going to say? I think that just really 2 points. The fact that you guys have experienced almost the exact same challenge, it really shows how valuable communities like this are, where we can reach out to each other for support. And recently I reached out to Nox because with our Kickstarter, we wanted to do some physical goods, and I was reaching out to companies and trying to figure out what the best path is here, or even if we should do it at all, right? And he was so great about sharing, and he just is transparent in his process, but it really helped us a lot to sort of understand, what maybe we could achieve. And when, we really try hard, like our team at 8 Monkeys, we try really hard to be not only open with what we do, but actually contribute to other developers. We were doing games in GameMaker, and we wrote up, some articles that ended up getting picked up by Gamma Sutra, just sharing our experience and our knowledge. And it's something that I really encourage developers to reach out to other devs. When you have a challenge, if you think maybe another dev has experienced that challenge, we really should be supporting each other, because there's so much knowledge that we gain through the process of making our games that is difficult to share. You just can't dump it on the internet, right? So it ends up just being your own knowledge and your own wisdom, which continues to fuel you in your path forward. But there's so much value in that, that can be shared with another developer to really help them and prop them up. And it's something it's really important to us here. And we're really active in the local community. We've run game jams and stuff like that. But we've had developers reach out to us, and I will set things aside and be like, hey, you know what? Let me get my lead developer over here, and let's just spend an hour talking with you about that issue you're having, and maybe we can help you overcome that. Because that hour we spend with that person could save them days, sometimes even weeks, right? So yeah, it's something we really want to do. And some of the systems we built for World of Antera, we plan to actually write about and release, so that other devs can look at that and say, oh my God, that's how you can do that. And really support them. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? Like you kind of oh, I overcame these challenges and it's mine. Like it's, I don't want to share that. But you got to kind of set that ego aside. And so I just wanted to share that, because just where the conversation went. So yeah.
But Damian, I know it's funny because both you and me and Stefan, we're all working in Unity, but we all have very different approaches to the games we're making. And I was just wondering, speaking of like challenges of making an old game experience, where do you get a lot of your textures from? I know the answer, but it may surprise some of our listeners.
I mean, textures.com is my friend, but still, if possible, vacation, going around, finding. I always took my cameras with me, at least the camera and at least my phone camera, if nothing else. And I take all the textures, walls, doors, especially doors. I'm a fanatic for doors. I perhaps have 1,000 old school doors and portals in my library.
Just doors, and you're like, what is going on here? What is it?
Everyone is looking at me. Why is he taking pictures of all those doors? Yeah, but I try to take all those myself. It pays up in the end.
I think it's hugely cool and very inspirational. I sometimes see on Twitter that you post some of the images you take, but the fact that they actually end up getting worked into assets for the game, I think that's really, really, really cool.
Cool.
Yeah, it's easy for me because the graphics in the game are a bit, they are downscaled, they are a bit reduced in colors and so on to fit but overall the style of the game is photorealism. Since I'm using real actors, the environments have to look the part. So it makes sense for me just to take
small segue
pictures.
There.
Yeah.
What about concerning audio? So obviously, I have me and Mark had to make do with what hardware we could get. 3 voices, a noise generator, an extremely limited 5-octave range, but they managed to get some pretty good, sounds out of it. But I guess the challenge for you guys is to use modern audio, like a clip library. Are you going to try to reproduce the old school square wave tones?
For me, initially, even the music was supposed to be, sound canvas, Roland sound canvas, or maybe even the MT32 era of the MIDI sounds. But then, as the graphics took a bit more of a high-end playing, then and I met Tony Manfredonia, which he's a great composer who's doing all the music. We went with full-fledged orchestral high-end soundtrack. It somehow fits the game. It's not a problem because the games in that era, in the 90s, 2000s, still used CD audio, and they tried to have the as high-end music as possible. But yeah, on the sound effects front, then it's all also recorded in nature, but it's still. My sound designer Ben could talk about that in a lot of detail, but he's basically using 2 microphones, one which is very low res sounding, and he combines and mixes so the sound effects are all a bit more limited. They are not as full as otherwise they would be. This is my case. Yeah,
I'm much like my inability to create the pixel art. I composed all my own music. That I did do, and I did it basically with the intention of sounding kind of like, Ultima 6 era music, but using more modern sounds. I had access to a professional recording studio. My father's a songwriter in Nashville. So I went there. He had, a MIDI bank that actually sounds like real instruments kind of thing. So it's like limited voices and, kind of the cadences were trying to be similar to the stuff that I really enjoyed by, the Fat Man and the Ultima era stuff. But with more modern sounds, but then not really tying myself down to it. Just kind of whatever seemed cool. And the first tracks I wrote like 8 years ago, and then I just wrote a new one a couple months ago, and they probably barely sound like the same thing. For sound effects, I just I got some Sonus libraries. They release samples, like 3 gigs worth of samples every year at GDC as just if you go to GDC or get this from someone who got it from them at GDC, you're licensed to use it. And so I just have like 14 gigs of Sonus samples and a handful of things that I bought off of like open source, open game sounds, or I don't remember what the name of the website is. Like I had to find a portcullis sound, and I was like, okay, I don't have something. I've got a handful. A guy I used to know had been making a game, and he abandoned it, but he did a lot of going out with microphones and such. So like my footstep sounds are all stuff that he had done, actually like stepping on different things. But aside from that handful of stuff, so like my walk sound managed to somehow, like, he managed to get a walking in sand sound that very much sounds like the square wave cronk sound of walking in Ultima 4, and that just tickled me, so I'm using that. But then like I have kind of a mishmash of like actual thwunk sounds of archery and such instead of going boot kind of stuff, which like I could have, if I'd had access to a sound library of just a bunch of sounds like that I had a license to, I might have gone that way, but I didn't. And it just, for me, this was the thing that I had. Like the pixel stuff I could at least go in and like modify and do simple stuff. Sound effects, more than anything else, is the domain where I was just like, I just have to find stuff that basically works and use it, because I'm just entirely out of my depth on this one.
Yeah, I guess I was fortunate in that Tunnels of Doom has all these really great monster sound effects, and I actually extracted the data from the cartridge so I could see how they were put together. And that's where I realized, I was like, wow, these guys, they know something about how they can manipulate the noise versus the square and change the volume and the frequency. And it's all done in an interrupt. So it's like 1/60th of a second intervals. So I actually had to make sure I crafted sounds for, like, when you're walking. They had to only be like 5 to 6 60ths of a second, because otherwise they get cut off abruptly. So I had to make them really short, but still convey the sound of walking on different tiles. So, like, different, walk on ice, you hear crackling sounds. Walking on grass, it's like a swish. Dirt makes a little crunchy noise. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of fun, honestly. So
interesting.
I will say, jumping back to the previous question, just because I think I'm the only person who did toss out an answer to that, and I did write a brief thing about recreating the overall challenges of recreating old experiences. I put that like it's like the quote about the marble and the elephant, but it can be really hard to figure out which bits should be chipped away and which bits should be retained. A lot of not all of us are trying to recreate games from the 80s, but games in the 80s had a lot of padding. It had a lot of grinding. Mm-hmm. It had a lot of bad UI that only sometimes was hardware limitations and sometimes was just how they did stuff at the time, what seemed like a good idea at the time. And we've learned a lot since then. But if you change too much, then it no longer feels retro. So for me, that's one of the unique challenges of recreating an old experience is how much can you improve it and still, what things, I mean, like when Shroud of the Avatar came out, and a lot of people were like, yes, we want a game that's not going to have a quest log and going to handhold you. And then people went so insane over the lack of direction that they patched in a quest log real quick after early access release. And so, I'm not actually trying to recreate on the old hardware, which is its own entire thing, but there is still how much do you want to kind of pretend you are for verisimilitude? Should my music sound like a SID chip, or an MT32, or how many colors? Using pixel art itself is recapitulating a constraint. So that's for me the challenge for recreating old experiences is not only the challenge of how to do the old experiences, but which old experiences are vital to the joy of the game and which should be cut away to increase accessibility, to implement things that we've learned about UI and game flow and such.
Yeah, and in regards to music, most platforms of the 80s didn't have good sound chips. I mean, C64 being the exception, and of course, you could get the synthesizer hookup for the Apple. But most of the time, if we wanted music during our games, we would just play a cassette tape on the side of some classical music while we game. So you can have modern music, orchestral scores, and you're not betraying the retro scene at all. So
that's a fair way to think of it. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on some of Golden Flame's comments. I'm not sure they're going to fit in anywhere else. One of the most interesting things I feel like I'm not going to say I discovered, but stumbled upon in this process, in this retro development process, is I guess what I call the exploration ratio, and it has to do, Golden Flame, with what you were talking about Shroud of the Avatar, and let's not have a quest log, and then everybody's lost. Okay, yes, let's have a quest log. And I played Shroud of the Avatar, actually. So it doesn't relate to that game specifically, but I had some of that experience. And there was a light bulb that kind of turned in my head at one point that, there is a huge difference in the size of the game worlds between the retro games of the 80s and the modern games like the Shroud of the Avatars and the Skyrims of the world. Those worlds are huge in these modern games. And so, yeah, if you don't have not just a quest log, but, like a quest compass, that's kind of guiding you where to go, you're gonna, well, most players are gonna get kind of lost. And then, but it was so much less necessary when you've got a world that's like 256 by 256 tiles, like Ultima 5 was, like Nox Chaos does, and I imagine that your retro games, Adam and Adam, are, if not that, probably a lot closer to that than the size of a Skyrim or a Shroud. And then additionally, what this got me thinking about was the exploration ratio, thinking about how, like with a Shroud or a Skyrim, it's like, okay, yeah, technically you can turn off the compass, the quest compass, or the quest line, whatever. And you can decide, okay, I got this quest to go talk to Joe the blacksmith over in, such and such a town, and which I haven't been to yet. And I, as the player, can decide, what, I'm going to do this the old school way. I am going to trudge across the world to find, this town, and then find Joe the blacksmith and do it the old way. And the issue is that in these huge worlds, there is a lot of, either there's a lot of empty space or there's a lot of procedurally generated space, as opposed to the games of the 80s where it was, this small world that was handcrafted so that you go around, this corner every so often, you're going to find something different and unique, and maybe it's important, maybe it's not. And that just drew the player into that sort of this fun of exploration that made it, okay, great, I haven't been to Minot, and I have no idea who Joe the blacksmith is, but I'm just going to kind of wander around until I find it, because I know I'm going to see other interesting things along the way. And I just wanted to put that out there because I thought that's a really sharp contrast that I've observed between the either the games of the 80s or games that are designed with that retro size and feel versus where modern RPGs have gone.
I've much observed the same thing, that when I was designing my game, which it technically is kind of 256 by 256, but it's all separate maps that are stitched together. When I was designing it, I realized I didn't, Ultima 2, fun game, lot of empty space with nothing. Like every map has like maybe one town on it, or like one town and one castle, and dungeons don't even get started on the. It's like there's just nothing to do. It's all just empty space. So all that exploration, the promise of it's like it's very broad but no depth. It's very shallow. So when I was designing my game, I was like, every map has to have something cool. And I would say Jeff Vogel with Avernum and his other games, really good at that. You go wandering off and you'll just find something at random, just some actual thing to engage with or encounter, or even like a little monster battle someplace, and he really was very inspiring in that. And so when I was going through, it was like every map has to have something cool. Every map has to have content. Every map has to have some kind of quest thing going on. That way, like if you go exploring, you'll get rewarded for exploring. If all you do is stick close to town and do nothing, well, you're not going to really experience the full depth of the game. But it's like the whole goal was make it broad, but also give it a lot of depth too.
Yeah, it's a real challenge to have, a huge world and fill it with interesting stuff. You can do, like you said, procedural stuff in between, random encounters and so on, but it's kind of lifeless, right, in the world. And you have to find a balance to compress the world down, to compress the distances, while I love the feeling that you really traveled from one town to another over. It was a challenge, traveled for days, and finally you arrived at that town, and it's so rewarding. But if you look at Skyrim, for example, in the initial village, for example, Riverwood, or how is it called? And there's a mountain up there, and the temple up at the top, and it looks so far away. The temple and the top is snowy, and you literally arrive there in 2 to 3 minutes of walk, right? It doesn't feel like you've traveled anywhere, even if the world is big, but still everything is so compressed. And yeah,
I think really a big challenge, not sort of a big difference between game design in the early 90s versus now, is that gamer habits have changed a lot, and you have to be a lot more careful about wasting people's time. I think that's something that people are almost allergic to now. So that's why you have to basically, for the most part, put in stuff like auto journals, auto mapping, compasses, because people won't stand for having their time wasted to the same degree, I guess. So, but I think like a good solution that I see is becoming more and more common, and something we're certainly leaning quite a bit into with Scald, is to have a lot of this stuff be optional. Give the option to toggle off the journal system, and then have the players get an extra achievement on Steam if they want to do it. Like include an Iron Man mode that includes more trash mob encounters, and maybe like weapon durability and a food system, but also allow people to turn it off if people just want to experience the story. I think like my experience so far is that it's easier than I thought to just add a couple of like toggles and be able to sort of turn off stuff in the game. That some people really enjoy, but a lot of people, especially more modern gamers, don't care for at all. They want more of like the condensed experience. And I think catering for both those demographics is absolutely possible. But you are making things difficult for yourself if you only cater to like the hardcore experience, because it very quickly starts smelling a little bit like gatekeeping, especially for us who are working in like a modern engine, because there is no reason not to include a journal system, for instance. There are no technical constraints to limit us from doing it.
There is an issue with modern games if you provide those options, to turn off, auto map, quest markers, and that the game is not built around turning those things off. So you don't have, you can't find, for example, the location you're looking for unless you're wandering aimlessly around. The old games were always designed by talking to someone who would tell you where that thing is, for example, right?
Exactly. So if you want to put those things into your game, it's good to design for that from the start, instead of retroactively trying to do like a Hail Mary passing and patch them out after launch, because then you can end up with a lot of sort of problems exactly like that. Exactly, there is no auto map, but there is no one telling you the direction to go either. So then you're kind of screwed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And even if there is someone telling you the direction, at the end of the day, like you said, talking about maybe younger, older gamers, even people who have played those games back then, we all have less time, right? So I might have talked to someone, they told me where to go, but I've got to head out in 10 minutes to do something, or got to start the kids or whatever. I might forget. So, maybe I do want that option where I want to toggle off the quest log. So then I'm like, okay, I have to go talk to that person again because I forgot. But there's also a part of me that's like, I don't want to do that. So I think there is a case we made for definitely being more accessible in that way for all kinds of gamers, for sure.
Yeah.
Accessibility is actually something that's really important to us. And we've gone even a bit further. And this is just one of the luxuries of having a team working on a project like this, but we're designed in a number of accessibility features to cater towards the differently abled community. There's data out there that shows there nearly 20% of all gamers in the world identify as differently abled, whether it's cognitive or visual or physical or whatever it happens to be. And so we've really asked ourselves, like, what kind of features and stuff can we turn off? For instance, like, what would happen if we turned off combat in our game? Like, or what would happen if combat was just something that automatically happened and you just got the results of it, for instance? And a lot of challenges around that. But I agree with everything that has been shared here. And I think a lot of this at the end of the day kind of falls onto that topic of accessibility, whether to have a quest log and quest markers and things like that. I happen to play a lot of games by turning the HUD off. Like I played Breath of the Wild with I think like there was like 3 states of the HUD or something. I played on the lowest one. So, but you know what? I was like halfway into the game and then I realized that I was completely missing out on a certain feature or ability because the icon wasn't on the HUD and I just had forgotten about it after it was first introduced. So, a lot of interesting challenges kind of crop up around this, but yeah, it's we joked World of Antera was originally called Quest Game. I think even that might be still referenced. It's referenced in a bunch of our design documents. And we always joked about it because it was called Quest Game, but it had no quests in it. But we've evolved really to a point where we're starting to really understand that how our side quests look and how we identify them for players. But there's still a lot of hurdles there, and that those hurdles are things we take very seriously. And sometimes we like sit there, and I know some of you have had this experience as well, where you're looking at just a word in a pop-up or something, and you're like adjusting it, like the color and the placement of it, or a button. Having come from mobile and social games to working on World of Antera, that stuff you can't work too much on because often a player downloads your game and they have 30 seconds. You have 30 seconds to capture their interest in the game, so you have to really nitpick every little usability aspect and make everything so clear in that first few moments of the experience. So balancing that in this game and letting go of it. We know we don't want to handhold players. Like, we want them just to go in the game and start to wander around and learn as they play. And so weaving all of that into the game experience is definitely a really interesting process. So, yeah.
I think we're coming up on time because we've gone over a little bit, but we've had loads of interesting things to say. I mean, personally, I could talk for another half an hour about even just the games that we played as kids or playing game as kids, and then people wanting to play those same types of games. But we've all grown up. Maybe we've changed physically, maybe we've changed mentally in the terms of how we can play the games and how we enjoy the games. So they do change over time, and you wouldn't necessarily be recreating something exactly that existed as you're a kid, or like you said, what people want. They don't want a quest log, but then they do want a quest log. So there's a lot of really interesting discussion about that, and personally I could talk about that for ages. But I think we will end it here today. But what I want from you all, or else, is just again who you are. Tell us who you are and your current or next project you're working on, or if you want to give your social media, that's all right too. Take it away.
Once again, I'm Adam Hawes. My game is Realms of Antiquity. It's available on Steam, and if you don't like Steam, it's also on itch.io. Or you can get it from my good friend arcadeshopper.com. He also has a limited number of collector's editions and deluxe size maps still available. Once they're gone, they're gone. Next projects, I have been working on a hint book for the game, which is a writing challenge because I'm trying to write it from the perspective of one of the characters in the game. And I'm it's fun, but
it's
ending up. It's going to probably be 200 pages by the time I'm done. So, and then as far as technical projects, I'm not quite done yet with my TI. I think my next project will be a procedurally generated roguelike of some kind. So, still in the design phase on that, but I'm very excited to put something else together that my old TI did not have.
I do like that you've made the bold move from talking about how people don't read hint books to then making a 200-page hint book. So I think that's pretty bold of you.
Next is going to be the 1-800 hint line.
Yeah.
I guess I'll go next. So yeah, just really, love talking with all you guys. This has been wonderful, and I hope we can do it again. Um, Again, my name's Stefan. I work with 81 Monkeys on World of Antera. If you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Discord. But if you just Google World of Antera, you'll find our website, and we're going to be running a Kickstarter in about 20 days. And we have a really wonderful community around that. So, yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you.
I'm still Anders Lauritzen, and I'm scoldrpg.com and at scoldrpg. You can wishlist the game and follow our Discord and so forth. And I think Fiona will probably in the notes section for this video, we'll probably just put links to everyone's projects so people can find us. And I am still working on Scald, and I will be doing that for quite a bit longer, so I'm not thinking about the next project yet.
I'm Adam Burr. I am not done with Chronicles of Elusis, The Dark Unknown, so that is going to be my ongoing project for hopefully not too much longer. I had the idea that my next project after that would be porting the game to Unity as an excuse to teach myself Unity, but without having to write a whole plot and everything, to be the game for that. We'll see if that winds up being what I do, but eventually I do have ideas for sequels that I'm hoping won't take me 12 years each, because I'll try to do a lot of engine reuse. On the other hand, I actually have a half-designed board game, so I might just work on that when I'm done with this for a change of pace before I get back to CRPGs. You can find me at tapestryofages.com.
My left, yeah. Yeah, so my name is Damian Mazetic, like I said before, and my game is Call of Saragnar. If you Google up for it, you can find it everywhere. Twitter mostly. I'm very much on Twitter. And I'm running also a Patreon for the development of the game, which has been kind of successful, I think. People love that. And yeah, my next project, there's quite a few, but if I'm not going with the sequel, then I'll probably go with the retro space sim shooter, story heavy, still in the lines of this game, but into space in the future. Yeah.
I'm Mark Lemmert of 6502 Workshop, the creator of the Ultima-inspired game Nox Arceus, which runs on original Apple II hardware as well as on modern hardware. You can get the game on our website as a digital download or collector's edition box set. It's also available as a download on Steam and on Good Old Games. And many thanks to my team for making the game as best as it possibly could be. And my team and I are currently working on Nox Arceus Lord of Storms, an expansion pack to the original game. And we've actually got a pre-order for that open, which can be found at noxarceus.com. And the target date for release is next March, I believe. And we also hope to work on a sequel at some point. And we also have a Patreon. And appreciate anyone who wants to offer some additional help there and helping us continue to create more 8-bit game content. And that's can be found at patreon.6502workshop.com.